Joining me now, Greg Wyshynski, senior ESPN writer, one of the preeminent writers across the country when it comes to the NHL. And we finally have our Stanley Cup matchup. Thanks for joining me for a couple of minutes to break it down.
My pleasure. It's going to be a fun one. I don't know if all the casual fans will be watching, but I know the hockey fans will be.
Well, I mean, for this Vegas team, how did they reach this point where they have become so successful so quickly? What is the key to their sort of rapid ascension been?
Yeah, it's funny. I asked Jonathan Marchessault that question when I was in Dallas covering the Western Conference Final, because he is one of 5 or 6 original golden misfits that are on this Vegas team, tracking back to the expansion draft. And he said that like having those guys still there kind of gives a baseline for how they want to play, what the culture is like. And that's allowed them to kind of sustain their success while at the same time augmenting many of those players with Alex Pietrangelo, Jack Eichel, Mark Stone, and others that have come through. So it's kind of a combination of the original vibe of the franchise, this defiant, we do things differently, we were tossed aside, we got a chip on our shoulder thing, and then also a bunch of obviously great veteran players they've added along the way with some human cost. I mean, they've gotten rid of some fan favorites over the years that haven't set well with the fan base and around the NHL at large. But I think it's to reach this point where the Knights are now 4 wins away from their first cup.
Is this the most talented version of Vegas that we've seen?
It's a real good question. I feel like, maybe in the years where Fleury was there and still at the peak of his powers, they might have been real good. But I don't think that they've had this combination of Eichel and Pietrangelo clicking at the rates that they're clicking right now. I mean, Eichel's healthy. It's the second year there. He's been a revelation in the playoffs for a lot of people that didn't even realize they could play the kind of defense that he's been playing. My template for a championship team is always give me 2 good centers, give me 2 good defensemen, give me a goalie. Without question, Eichel and whoever you want to throw out there next, William Karlsson, whomever, they've got 2 centers. Between Pietrangelo and Shea Theodore, they've got 2 great defensemen that play upwards of 50 minutes of a 60-minute regulation game. As long as Aiden Hill doesn't turn into a pumpkin in the Stanley Cup Final, I think that they've got what it takes to win this thing.
What do you think the odds of that happening is?
I thought it was going to happen in the conference final against Dallas. It didn't, though. He had 2 shutouts. Look, he's actually playing a bit better than the level you might expect. The level you might expect is don't screw it up for us. Like just make the saves we need you to make. But I think he's been a bit better than that. I actually think that he's played some really good hockey. I think he's 4th right now in the NHL in the postseason and goals saved above expected. He's got a high danger save percentage in league with what Sergei Bobrovsky's done. I'm not saying he's Bob, but I am saying that he's been a bit better than simply a guy that's entered the playoffs because of injury and has just collected a bunch of W's with a really good team in front of him. So I have a higher level of confidence for him in this round than I did before the conference final. That's for sure.
Would you give Florida the goaltending edge in this matchup?
Very much so. I mean, Bobrovsky has been great. He didn't need to be great in the Boston series. He had some really good moments, but they win the Leafs series because of him, because he goalied them in the first 2 games of that series, really set them on their way to winning pretty quickly against Toronto. I thought he was terrific in the Carolina series. Obviously, Tkachuk gets all the accolades for scoring the game-winning goal in that quadruple overtime game, but Bob was insanely good in that game too. So they have a distinct advantage in goal. I think the Panthers have 2 advantages if you wanted to go categorically here, and one is in goal. The other is probably special teams. The Knights' penalty kill is not as bad as the stats say, because they did have to play the Oilers in the second round, and ain't nobody going to come out of that series with good penalty kill stats. But I think overall the Panthers have had the better special teams throughout the playoff run. So those are the 2 advantages they have with a very big edge in goal, obviously, with the way that Bob's been playing.
Well, so you just outlined kind of the recipe on a roster of what you think you need to win a cup. But in terms of position, you talk about special teams, goaltending, offensive attack, what have you. Is the goaltending matchup the most significant, in your opinion, in terms of ranking what's most important when you get to the finals?
No, because I think Hill's played well enough to win. I think the biggest and most interesting matchup here is on the blue line. I mean, say what you will about the Panthers, but they've gotten some really good performances from players in their blue line, maybe punching above their weight, but they don't have an Alex Pietrangelo. They don't have a Shea Theodore back there necessarily. And I think that the as much as the advantage for the Panthers is Bobrovsky over Hill, I think the advantage for the Knights is their defense core versus the Panthers defense core. I mean, Brandon Montour, who's been really good for Florida, doesn't have a point in 8 games. The 3 pairings that the Knights can throw at you, I think, are all really good and have played really good and have done a really good job insulating Hill, not allowing high danger chances, clearing out the crease, making shots difficult. The Panthers love to get inside and get shots in close and beat you around the crease. And I think they're going to have a hard time with that because the Knights' defense is so good and so physically good.
And you think the series could really hinge on that, the fact that they're not going to be able to do what they want to do offensively with the way that Vegas is built defensively?
Well, in theory they won't, but the Panthers have a funny way of finding ways to score, man. Like, I thought that the Carolina Hurricanes were the best defensive team I had seen in the playoffs, and the Panthers were able to get their goals on the board against them. I mean, using special teams in a pretty big way in that series, but overall, we're able to create offense. Look, I think the Panthers have shown that they've got what it takes to find ways to create offense, even against really tough defensive teams, Boston being one of them, Carolina being another. But I do think that the Knights present a very intriguing problem in the sense that not only is their depth good, but their depth can also counterpunch. Like I mentioned, William Karlsson, 10 goals on the playoffs. He's on their 3rd line. When you have the ability to have offensive depth and players that play both sides of the rink really well, like Karlsson and Stone and Eichel and Marchessault, it makes it really tough for the other team.
Are there any sort of, I mean, this is such a low-hanging fruit kind of lazy word when you say like X factors in the series, but is there anybody that you're looking at on the Florida roster that you think will be able to do something creative offensively outside of their usual suspects, if you will?
Well, I mean, he's kind of one of the usual suspects, but Sam Reinhart's an interesting one for me only because he doesn't play on either of the top 2 lines. And this series could be a series that's won via depth, and they're going to have to rely on him to really be a force on their 3rd line and create opportunities. But the biggest X factor for me, it's twofold, and it doesn't involve any players. One is home ice advantage, because we've seen what Vegas looks like. It's a madhouse. It's a really tough place to play. The Panthers all time in Vegas 0-5 as a franchise. So that's one thing. I mean, I can't even imagine what the atmosphere is like if this thing goes 7. And the other thing is the rest versus rust thing. I mean, the Panthers break between the conference final and the Stanley Cup final is going to be 9 days. And that's tied for the 4th longest break in NHL history for a team between the conference final and the Stanley Cup final. 2 of the teams that had longer breaks were the Bruins against the Blues, and they lost in 7, and the Mighty Ducks against the Devils back in 2003, and they lost in 7. So the history is not exactly on the Panthers side when it comes to having this amount of time between the conference final and the Stanley Cup final. And the other part of that, obviously, for Florida, that their coach Paul Maurice has mentioned is this was a team that was feasting on momentum, winning a 4 overtime game, coming back, winning another overtime game, that kind of thing. Like, to have that kind of break and take you out of that emotional moment is going to be a really tough thing for the Panthers to handle as they leap into this series.
Yeah, that's interesting. There's a lot of parallels here too, as Miami and Denver get set to square off over on the other final series that's running parallel to this. Do you think that that is something that will play a significant role? I mean, what does your gut tell you about this particular squad's ability and really their coaching staff to get them going? Momentum is real. I mean, I think that you bring up a really significant point. That's a big deal. But with the Stanley Cup on the line, do you anticipate that they will be able to get it going?
I do think it helps that they open on the road. I do think it helps that they're going to be thrown into a very, very tough place to play. They're going to snap right back into that underdog mentality, punching from underneath like they did in every series they played in, because Vegas is favored in the series, but I think it really feels like they're favored in the series when you walk into the Fortress on game 1 and get a taste of just the madhouse that it is. The sights, the sounds, the showgirls, the Elvises, the Knights slicing a Panther in half or whatever the hell they're going to have in their pregame. Like it's a tough place to play. And I think it really gets you back into that mindset of we have this insurmountable challenge in front of us. And the Panthers, every time they've felt that, have answered the call.
Are you pleasantly surprised or kind of thrilled by the Vegas fan base and how they've leaned into something that I would consider maybe somewhat an unorthodox setting for hockey in this way, but the fact that it's such a formidable place to come and play, I think is just kind of delightful. And the circusry, the pageantry, whatever you want to call it, almost adds to just the fun of it all.
It does, and it's a great hockey town. I mean, no doubt. The Knights being the first pro team to get into that market, ahead of the Raiders, ahead of the Oakland A's, ahead of whatever NBA team shows up. There's a bond between that city and that team that is real, and you have to remember the history there too. Like their first game in Vegas happened a few days after that really tragic shooting on the Strip, and their first game in Vegas, while a celebration of a new hockey team coming to the market, was also a time to honor first responders and moments of silence for the victims, and having their captain, Derek Englund, at the time, speak to the crowd in a very heartfelt way. They got bonded to that city and that fan base in a way that no other expansion team has before. And that's carried it through for the next several seasons. And so, yeah, it's a real hockey town. Their owner, Bill Foley, has spent millions to build the infrastructure for the sport, to build a new facility out in the suburbs for practices and stuff like that. That's paid off too. And it's all come together to make it a really, really strong and robust fan base for the Vegas Golden Knights.
That's such a great point that you bring up. And I forgot about that. I just got full chills when you mentioned that, how that bond was fused just instantaneously, and how powerful that can potentially be for setting a foundation for what the town is going to be in terms of their relationship with hockey. For Florida, does this feel like something of a destined run to you? I mean, for them to kind of get through Boston, who everybody had already crowned before they had, made a deep playoff run. What do you make of the fact that they find themselves here on the verge of potentially winning their first cup?
Yeah, when I was writing the Puck Daddy blog at Yahoo, we had a thing like every playoff we'd say it's the team that had the most compelling season-ending DVD stories that probably wins the cup. This is back when people bought DVDs. And the Panthers have that. I mean, my God, like beating Boston in that series, rallying from 3-1 down to beat the best regular season team we've ever seen in overtime in Boston. The Leafs series, winning that series to the point where like they don't bring back their general manager. And then the Carolina series with that 4 overtime game, the 6th longest in NHL history, winning that game. I mean, like they've had the high spots. They've certainly had the more compelling journey to the point where you feel like it's a team of destiny a little bit with the way things have come together. So that's their story. I mean, Vegas doesn't have that kind of narrative. They might just be the better hockey team.
I was just going to say, top to bottom, who do you feel like is the better hockey team? Is it Vegas that you think is just constructed in a stronger way, in a better way? Not that really matters. I mean, it kind of, some of that stuff goes out the window, I think, with the cup on the line. But
yeah, they don't. Yeah, Vegas has got the 2 better defensemen than Florida has. All due respect to Aaron Ekblad. They've got 4 lines. I think Florida's 4th line is just sort of like they throw it out there and hope for the best. And Vegas's 4th line was the reason they won Game 6 against the Dallas Stars. The goaltending advantage is real for Florida, but the overall depth and having more high impact players who again have won before. Don't forget that's also a big thing with this Vegas team. They've got Pietrangelo there. They've got Barbashev from that Blues championship team. Alec Martinez is there. Jonathan Quick is there from those Kings championship teams. Phil Kessel's sitting in the press box, but he's got a couple cup rings with the Pittsburgh Penguins. So there is also a bit of that championship vibe that they have some veteran players in that room that can help out in those situations where maybe things feel like they're kind of spiraling away. You have some veteran voices in that room that I think help calm things down too.
Do you put a lot of stock in that? I mean, we hear that sort of refrain a lot of, oh, these guys have the championship veterans, the championship mentality, the this, the that. Is that as important as people on the outside think it is?
Come on, you saw the Leafs. They bring in Ryan O'Reilly. They get good in the playoffs through osmosis. Win their first.
Cynic right now, and I don't know why. I'm in a cynical mood.
They win their first playoff round since 2004 because he's there. No, I mean, listen, the rings in the room thing can be very overrated in some cases. Like just because a guy was on a championship team doesn't mean anything, right? Other than maybe he's got some insight as to how arduous it can be. But when you get players from their core power structure that were important for them, I mean, like Pietrangelo was the captain of a Stanley Cup championship team. I mean, Alec Martinez scored the series winning goal for the LA Kings against the New York Rangers. Like, you've got guys that have been there and have been in key moments. And I do think that can make a difference. But again, like, it's not to say that, the Panthers don't have that with Eric Stahl on their team. And everybody's got a guy that's been there before. It's just a matter of how you heed the advice given by those players and also how hard they play as sort of pace setters for the rest of the roster.
Appreciate the insight, Greg. Before I let you go, can I get something of a prediction from you? How many games do you think we could see in this series? Who do you think ultimately will come out on top?
Yeah, I took the Knights in 6. It may be recency bias because I covered them in the conference final, but I was just left really impressed with not only their depth and not only with how some of their top players are executing right now, but a bit of killer instinct too. I mean, to play the Game 3 and Game 6 in Dallas the way that they played, where they were merciless in the first 10 minutes of both of those games to try to not let their opponent get anything in the way of momentum, was just really impressive. And the Panthers have been great. I wouldn't be surprised if they won the Cup. It could just be their year, especially with the way that Bobrovsky's playing. But home ice advantage, the depth, the way that they have a number of different scorers going at the same time, I think is enough for me to pick the Knights in this series.
Greg Wyshynski, ESPN senior writer. Thank you so much for taking a couple minutes, Greg. Do you have any DVDs from the old Puck Daddy Yahoo blog days? Do you have a Mighty Ducks DVD that you just couldn't part with, or is that makes me sad? Are those days officially gone?
I grew up a Devils fan, so I actually have all of not only their commemorative VHS tapes from their 3 Cup wins when I was a kid, but my dad on VHS taped all of their games during those Stanley Cup runs. So I've got that in a box somewhere in my house, and I don't know. Do they even make VCRs anymore? If they do, I'll watch it one day.
Find a VCR. You have to find a VCR. Oh man, that's great stuff. Greg, thank you so much. Enjoy the series. Appreciate the time.
Yep, anytime. Thanks for having me.